This 6888. I'm not even gonna wait to the end of the video. I'm gonna just go ahead and say it. This is a really well done film. Now, usually with Tyler Perry Productions, we're used to hearing criticism, which is fine because it's art and most people have their own criticism about whatever they're consuming. And I've actually critiqued him before, but what I also believe in is when somebody does something well, you say that too. And you say it just as loudly as you would say those critiques. And this is a great one for Tyler. So this being a historical film, it's not quite like the Type 5 productions that we're used to. Type 5 production is brought to you by Angel Akita Moore Tanksley, the actress / raptress. Don't steal from black women, support them. So from the very top of this film, I was super locked in. And at first I got to a certain point and then I fell asleep. So I didn't really get too far in the film. And I was talking to somebody yesterday and she was like, well, it starts off kind of slow with that love story and stuff, but it'll pick up after that. And to be honest, I actually enjoyed that part about the love story between Lena and Abram. You could absolutely tell that they liked each other from the beginning. And Mary Catherine was hating because she couldn't pull Abram on her best day. She just wasn't that girl. And this is what usually happens. When a person can't compete, they normally put somebody else down. Because even though Abram and Lena were fine, they had an internal connection. What did they say? The light is in you, it's not on you. And that story was pretty short and sweet, but at least he got to say what he was feeling, and it confirmed how she was feeling on the inside, but she couldn't really say it because she's a black woman trying to date a Jewish man in the 40s. Like, no ma'am. And she was expected to go off to school, but she realized, I don't have no money. And then the mom was like, well, maybe her dad gonna come back with some money. And I don't know why the auntie was on her mama's head so much, but she was like, did he ever come back with some money, girl? I kind of felt bad for the mama because she was getting red the whole time. And then after Lena got that letter about Abram passing in the war, she decided to go fight Hitler too and forego going to school. I really felt for her because she was grieving and it seemed like she was searching for something to move forward with her life. So after graduation, Lena decides to go join the army. I appreciated that train ride scene down to Georgia because when the white man came back there to separate the white women from the black women, he was asking one of the women that was sitting in the space with all the black women if she was coming. And she kind of passed for white, but she said, I'm assuming you separating the white women from the colored women. I'm Negro. And I really appreciated that scene because she could have left those sisters behind, but instead she was proud and confident in who she was. And then Johnny May broke that ice and she was trying to get them to all introduce themselves. I feel like they all did a really good job of defining who their characters were. And one of my favorite characters in the film is Johnny May. So she was really funny at times and then sometimes she was a little bit annoying, but we also didn't get everything in her story. I know she said her husband beat her a little bit too much and then she said she grew up in the country. So they didn't give us too much about her story. So I will say that there might be some criticism in this part because she is quote unquote the big girl of the movie. And usually when you have a bigger character, they normally have to do certain things. They're normally really funny, they're loud, they cuss or whatever. They're usually aggressive in dating, if you could think about Nikki Parker or even Kim Parker to a certain extent. And to a certain extent, sometimes they're more violent. And she's not even fat in the film, but she's bigger than the other girls. And also they tried to make her out to be the big girl. If you listen to that scene where she was on the scale and she was like, you almost overweight. And I was like, hey, not too much on my girl. Now, the moment that Captain Campbell walked in to get the ladies together so Major Charity Adams could walk in, I was like, oh, so y'all really acting out here. And the moment Kerry Washington walked in and delivered those lines, I was like, oh yes, she was delivering from the beginning. I expected it, but I just got to point that out. She did so well, I didn't think she was acting because she was putting the women through it. She was like, not only are you in the army, but you're Negroes and women. And because you're Negroes and women, you don't have the luxury of being as good as the white soldiers, but the burden of being better. So she had to push these women and she had to push them really hard because she said, I'm going to give you my best and I expect the best from you. And Lena and them thought Major Adams didn't like her. She did like her and she grew to respect her. She just wasn't sure about it at the beginning. And honestly, I don't disagree with that because Lena did not present herself as a fighter. She had herself on strike too. And then she started showing that fight in her after she remembered why she was doing it. I can also probably see somebody critiquing this part because it's like, nah, not this woman going into the army because she looking for some dude. I can see somebody complaining right now. And speaking of men, Hugh Bell. He was one of the first men she met when she got off that truck. He absolutely had to see something in Lena because he broke off a whole engagement. He did research and everything. I don't know how much of that is true, but if that did happen, that's wild. But Lena eventually married Hugh, so I guess he was right about something. He was one of the first people to believe in her. Now, I don't know if it's because he liked her or not, but he did say, you have something in you that I don't think you can see, which she did, and she eventually came to know that. And pretty much everybody is fighting battles in so many different ways. Major Adams is trying to get missions for her women that she's been training all these years, but they keep giving it to white women. And then one day at the Roosevelt's residence, they have a meeting. They wanted to solve the issue of mail not getting to and from soldiers like it was supposed to be. People haven't heard from their folks in months, and the soldiers' morale was down because they weren't receiving any care packages or mail. In general, Uncle Daddy Halt was right there, and he and his partner were making all kinds of excuses as to why the mail didn't get where it needed to go. And he was trying his best to make it sound like they done exhausted all the resources to do this, but he was only thinking of the white women. And then Mary McLeod Bethune, played by Oprah, and my friend said she was giving Miss Sophia, which I can't unsee now. But I digress. Bethune said that there are black women soldiers that can take care of this task. In a pure racist and misogynist fashion, Halt was like, this takes a particular set of skills and intellect to be able to complete, which it did, but it also showed that y'all had a lack of that skill. Because if you had that skill, you would have already used it. So thank you for telling on yourself. So that conversation led to a letter that got sent to her battalion, and they sent them over there to Europe. Now, at first she was feeling some kind of way because she was like, first of all, we didn't get 2 letters like everybody else. And we only got this one letter that called us the male battalion, and I didn't like that. And not only that, when we get to the bar to talk to the general, me and Captain Campbell stand there while you make fun of us in front of your little friends and try to say, oh, is 6 months good enough for y'all to do it? Because you thought it would be an impossible task, but it wasn't. And we agreed to do this task before seeing all the hangars full of mail. But we still saved the day and completed this task in 90 days, despite the lack of direction or help. And y'all slick tried to set us up because y'all said entertain the soldiers over the weekends. And she was like, I ain't running no whole house. Because while they were having a good time, you know what you did? You sent a chaplain up in there. Not even a black one. So I knew some foolishness was afoot. Because that sermon he gave, if you want to call it that, was terrible. He was looking directly at her talking about she was evil. I wanted somebody to yank him off that pulpit so bad. I hollered when Johnny Mae kept her eyes open during the prayer. Because I was like, I feel you. But when she had him back in that office and he was talking to Major Adams, she was over there reading his letters and stuff, talking about, oh, she's an evil woman. She got this brothel she running. And then he came in talking about, these are my things. And she said, no, your things are by your feet, because this the last day you staying over here. This soldier gonna see you out. And then when Captain Campbell was like, can she help you with your bags? I shouted. What I noticed is that while I was watching this film, if there was something that happened, I was like, man, I wish they would do this. And then like the next scene it would happen, I was like, you know what? I was like, this is very much so me. Like I was a big fan of how information was given. For example, when Lena got upset because how they were throwing those dog tags around, and she said, you can't just throw this. This means people died. And then she asked to be able to go to the latrine. And then the other women went to the bathroom to check on her. And then that's how the other women found out that Abram had passed, and she had come there trying to find some type of connection to him. And then Johnny Mae stopped picking on her for saying, you calling this man's name out at night, because now you have an answer as to why she's calling his name. And that's where Major Adams actually tells Lena that she likes her and that she now has a face to how important this male situation is. And even at the party with Hugh Bell, where he was like trying to talk to Lena and he started singing that song that Abram was singing before he left. Now, I'm not going to hold you. Hugh Bell did sound good singing it though. And so that brought up a memory and made her cry and run outside and stuff like that. But when he got outside, he was like, hey, I'm no longer with my fiance and I'm very interested in getting to know you. And she said the right thing. She was like, listen, I'm dealing with a loss. I don't have nothing to give you. To which he replied, you can be my friend. And I was like, at first I was like, that sounds like some F-boy stuff because I don't trust it. But then, you know, they over here dealing with war, so they probably do need friends. So something I didn't like is how they disseminated bad news to the mail battalion. They were like, oh, y'all had 57,000 pieces of mail that were considered undeliverable. And General Halt was like, yeah, I'm going to keep informing the president of your progress or lack thereof. So they had to revisit their game plan. And there were a number of issues that made this task really hard to accomplish. But something had to be done. Because when that man walked in there and talked funky to Johnny Mae about that mail of his that was returned, I was hoping she was going to let him have it. But then she listened to her major from earlier in the film. She held on to her composure. But I saw that one tear come down like Denzel in Glory, and I was like, she really holding that in. And the major saw what was going on with Johnny Mae. And she was like, something else needs to happen. So she started asking for feedback from the women that had been doing the job. And they had plenty of it. And that's when they started leaning into their personal skill sets, where it allowed them to kind of compartmentalize what was needed and how to solve different problems. And after they figured all this out, I think it was smooth sailing from then until tragedy struck. Literally. So the drivers of the mail truck were being redirected, and I don't think they understood why. And I was a little confused in that scene. I was thinking they were going to stop and ask that person why they were waving their arms like that, but they were trying to make time, so they kept going. And I do remember one scene in the movie where the major was saying, do not veer off of your path. So they were sort of following orders. And then they pull up through one section of the street, and the woman says, I think we just pulled over a UXD. And the other woman was like, what do we do? She said, we need to vacate this truck. So they told the women in the back of the truck to get out slowly. And then they tried to get out, but I guess it was too much weight, distribution changes, and all that kind of stuff, and it exploded. So those sisters ended up dying, and the battalion had to take up money because the army didn't want to cover the funeral, which is ridiculous on the army's part, but the women took care of each other. Remember when I was talking about good communication earlier? The women in the bathroom with Lena knew that she was looking for a letter or something from Abram, and Johnny Mae ended up finding a letter from Abram to Lena. And this was before they had the funeral of those delivery women. So they had the funeral for the young ladies, and then after that, Major Adams told Lena that Abram's grave was out there and she wanted to give her time at the gravesite. So she asked, is it okay if Hugh Bell takes you home? It was a very emotional scene because she finally opened the letter and she read it at his grave. And essentially he was like, listen, he said, it's looking more like I'm not going to be able to make it home. And I want you to live a full life and live a good long life for both of us. He said, I'm glad I got to tell you how I felt. And he was only sad that it took him so long to say it, which is a very serious point that a lot of people forget about life. We got to go after what we want. No regrets. And when she finished that letter and she was just letting it all out, I mean, it almost made me cry. And I'm glad she got to have that moment because that weight that she was carrying was heartache and that grief had to find some kind of closure in order for her to heal. And I'm glad Hugh was there to take her back and be a friend and allow her to feel all the feelings that she wanted to feel. And in one of the last scenes, the general came to see the soldiers. He was just so cantankerous. I couldn't stand him. He was complaining just to complain because they made that place livable. He talking about, you got time to get your hair done, but you ain't got time to come see me. Not if I'm working a night shift, I don't. And so he finally gets into the main sorting area and he's just going around trying to pick everything apart. And they have an explanation for everything he's asking. And I think the last straw for him is when he found out that they were reading the letters of the white soldiers, talking about they private. Boy, if I don't know where to send it, I'm gonna tell you right now, that private letter is going nowhere. Side note, he kept calling them gal, and I see why my mama hated the word gal now. That, red bone, or high yellow. So he keeps berating them and yelling at her, and then he says, I'm gonna have you relieved from your duties. And then Major Adams was like, over my dead body. Now, I paused in my mind because I was like, now, didn't you tell Johnny Mae that she can't give people what they want and that you have to control your emotions? I made that objection in my mind, and then I was like, overruled. Go ahead. When I tell you Olivia Pope showed up in that room and gave him a full rundown of where he messed up, I said, you better read that heifer. Now, I was hoping the soldiers was going to clap as the white men were walking out silently, but they didn't. They did something better. They actually showed that they had discipline in that moment, waited on them to leave, and then had a private ovation for the major. And then she went full on Kerry Washington cry. Meanwhile, the general's over here trying to hate and get her court-martialed and stuff like that. But black women were the hero of that moment because the mail got where it needed to go. So he could stay mad. Side note, this guy right here, Lee, he was a fan of the battalion because every time he saw them, he was happy. Especially in that moment where they were marching through the streets after they got off the boat and they presented arms. He was like, I know that's right. He was definitely a fan. And that was pretty much the end of the movie as far as the acting goes, because then they started showing real footage of the real women. And then they showed the real Lena at 100 years old. And let me tell you, 100 looked good on her. She's talked about how they did such a good job. They were given 6 months, but they did it in 90 days. And they did such a good job, they were asked to do the same thing in France. 17 million pieces of mail is crazy. And she talked about the fact that they were treated much better in Europe than they were when they came back home. As I said at the beginning of the video, it was a really good film. It flowed well. I liked the writing. I love the story. And even though it was stuff that I didn't like as far as like the treatment of the people, I did like the way that they presented it. So what did y'all think? Did y'all like the film? Did I miss something? Feel free to leave a comment below, like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell because I will be dropping more content soon.